You can get a round of applause for yourselves for crossing school lines today. Coming all the way down to Pomona. Thank you so much. All right, I'm just going to hide this stuff for a minute. Okay, so welcome to BESHT. My name is Professor Padu Paga of BESHT. This is the Bureau of Experimental Speech and Holy Theses, and I'm just going to introduce the project as a whole and the series that's happening here, and then I'll hand it off to the Eternal Telethon, which is a group that I've also been involved with for a handful of years, but Alexis and Nico are representing it today and going to talk to you about where that organization is from, what the mission is, and what we'll be doing next Tuesday. But in general, this is the BESHT Free Speech Auditorium, and the focus in this space is experiments in public speaking, and it specifically addresses issues surrounding, authority, language, persuasion, black magic, charm, and so forth. So it's a fun space. It's related to a number of different kinds of inspiration. One of the main forms of inspiration is Toastmasters. Has anybody here done Toastmasters before or witnessed Toast? Anyone know what it is? Anyone? Yes? Have you done it?
No, I've heard of it.
What do you know what it is? Mm-hmm.
And I think they've got specific topics that they'll cover.
Mm-hmm.
It's a series, but I don't know very much beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's about right. Now, one thing before we continue, this space is also a live space. Right now it's being broadcast live on the internet and being recorded by the camera over there. So, just FYI. But yes, so Toastmasters is a club for public speaking. It's actually it's from Santa Ana. It's from Southern California. It was born in 1924, and now it has, I think, somewhere over, I don't know, like 13,000 clubs around the world, and like a few 100,000 members. And the focus is people come in, they speak, but it's not what you think. It's not just toasts. They are also, it's in fact, it's very few toasts. It's just called that. It's very boardroom-esque. It's very much, what you might imagine like if you're going to a conference and they have like the keynote speakers and stuff. And so there's lots of it's very formal. There's handshakes. There's a Toastmaster who kind of introduces each person each time. And there's usually a handful of people who speak. But then there are other people who have different roles. So there's a grammarian whose role is to sit in the back and count how many times people say and like and and they keep track of that sort of stuff. Then they have evaluators who have to watch each of the individual lectures, and then they have to stand up and deliver their evaluation at the end for like 3 to 4 minutes. Everything's timed. They have tons and tons of modules that you can find online. Usually they cost money, but it makes sense that folks who are so inexperienced in public speaking are also pretty inexperienced in locking down their websites. So you can find a lot of these materials online as well. But they have modules on everything from how to talk to the press, to how to give a eulogy, to how to whatever. And so people come and practice that stuff. And in that situation, it's a very low stakes situation where you have people coming in who have very little public speaking experience, and they're talking mostly to strangers. Occasionally, there are like couples who are there, or they come with their friends. Occasionally, groups will create their own clubs, so there are ones where people tend to know each other better. But the one that I visited in Glendale, it seemed like everybody was very, very different. It ranged from people, there were people there who were English as a second language, so this was part of their language training and kind of becoming a better speaker of dominant one here. Then there were Tea Party activists, one of whom had run for a city council in Glendale, and he was there, and he was practicing his pitch and going through his talking points. There was another elderly man who was more like in his late 70s, early 80s, who was also Tea Party affiliated, and he had all these props and stuff. And then I asked one other person, there was another fellow there. It's funny because everything is so simulated, they're all working off the modules, and everybody, the reason people are there is because they're really not horrible public speakers. So everything is really off kilter. And one of the things that's very simulated there is everybody is also practicing introducing themselves to you. So they're constantly walking up to you, especially if you're new, and saying, "Hi, my name's so-and-so," and they have this weird stare in their face, and it's really uncomfortable. But I talked to one fellow who introduced himself to me, and I asked him, why are you here? Has Toastmasters helped you? And he was like, yeah, it's been really great. And one of the main reasons he wanted to do it was because he said he has a really big family. And, the result of having a really big family is that there tends to be a lot of death in the family. And so that he's constantly going to funerals or, on a semi-regular basis. And he just wanted to be able to, in those moments of pain and darkness, to be able to stand up and say something poignant. He was tired of just sitting down and sitting back and either waiting for someone else to speak or whatever. He wanted to be, a leader within his family and a healer. So it's interesting. A lot of people look at this, at public speaking in a lot of different ways. But in terms of Toastmasters, to get back to Toastmasters, it's interesting because they relate Toastmasters specifically to leadership skills, okay? So when you go, you're not just getting trained in public speaking, you're getting trained in leadership skills, okay? So anyways, now one other reason that this is kind of, BESHT has been fascinated with public speaking and Toastmasters is that all the people who are affiliated with BESHT, or at least not necessarily everybody who walks in the door, but who is organized and who will be involved in it, and are all artists. And one thing, after getting out of school as an artist, out of grad school, you all, whether you get, doesn't matter whether it's undergrad or grad school, but you're going to get out and you're going to realize that, there are things we have to do that are not artistic necessarily, or even art related to, make money or to just survive. And even within the realm of both the professional world that's not art and professional world that is art, there's very few real professional development programs that folks like us can even take seriously. We're so used to, as artists, just looking at the rhetoric of things and at the forms and kind of being kind of that postmodern kind of wariness that when we see, people, we see people talking about, building a resume and getting your business plan together, and it's just some of it just either doesn't make sense or it just feels kind of cockamamie. And you're going to find that there's so little out there for us as artists in terms of real professional development that we can take seriously. And oftentimes you have to venture outside of the arts organizations to get that sort of thing. So for instance, for me, it was I had a very body-based practice. I wanted to learn massage. I tried to write a grant to the American Composers Forum to try and get them to fund my massage studies because I was doing body-based music. I got a recommendation letter from one of the biggest, most famous composers, Pauline Oliveros, saying, yes, Adam should totally get this grant. She wrote to the place, and they still didn't give it to me, even though it made perfect sense. And so I had to go out and do that on my own, and it costs a lot of money. I have other friends who are professionals like lawyers or teachers or whatnot, and they're offered all sorts of things, ranging from classes in conflict resolution and mediation to negotiation. Any kind of Asian sort of thing is available to everyone else. right? There's there's some organizations that do offer things for artists, like I think there's one called the CCI. This is being recorded. I'm going to slam them in a second. But their stuff is complete and utter bullshit. It's so pitiful. It's specifically for artists, and all they offer are resume building things and how to businessify your practice. Complete and utter bullshit. I'm sure the people who run the workshops are awesome, but that within our community, in our post-school community, that is, I mean, yes, some people need that, but we need conflict resolution. We need public speaking stuff. We need, we have our friends are dying. We need to be able to stand up and speak at our friends' funerals. All sorts of things. We have a lot of needs as artists that are not being met. And so I think that's kind of where, the Eternal Telethon will come in, is that, we as artists, I think, are often painted as, as primarily the privileged, primarily people who just have a lot of extra time on their hands, As Nico likes to say, art, usually, people become artists once they retire. You don't retire from art, you retire so that you can do art. But artists don't really get to retire the same way that people have in the past. Yeah, retirement is just a state of mind, I think. Maybe the way that you cross your legs while reclining.
I'm waiting for my photo.
Yeah, we'll get one in a sec. So, but anyways, it's just something that I've thought about a lot. That now on the one hand, yes, I would love for artists like myself and my community to have like these professional development opportunities, but then at the same time, we're just too fucking wary just to do those workshops. Like oftentimes we'll, I went to like a mediation workshop, and yes, I like cried and it changed my life. But then at the same time, on the other hand, I'm also, yeah, thank you. Then on the same side, it's just like, it's just so hard not to have that meta experience in it and kind of also be critical. And so what I've been very interested in doing, and there's another organization that I'll be starting with a collaborator named Alana Mann, the Experimental Leadership Forum, or ELF, which would be for artists, where we do professional development regimes from all different areas that other professionals are doing, but then we learn it the way they learn, and then we experiment beyond that with the forum. So it's not all about just becoming more and more efficient, but potentially, being less and less efficient, or just fucking with it. And BESHT kind of basically comes out of that. That was the original thing that kind of came to mind. Is like, why am I sitting at another shitty artist lecture? Like, why am I, amen, can I get an amen? Why am I at another horrible panel? Why are they completely oblivious of who is here and why? It's just mind-boggling. And so, like, well, where do you learn that sort of thing? It's not because people are dumb or whatnot. It's because they just haven't been shown that, there are other ways to do it. That's like the main thing. It's like, oh, did you realize you can also like sit with your back slot? Like you can rearrange things. You can change it. There are other formats. So that's part of where we come out of this. And so it's interesting. Has everybody seen the shows next door yet? Anyone? I highly recommend it. It's some interesting work. It's by the composer John Cage. Any folks know John Cage's music at all? Anyone? Raise your hand if you've heard some John Cage. Oh, cool, great. What if has anybody read some John Cage? Oh, interesting. That's interesting. And in my day, it was mostly that you very rarely got to hear any John Cage. You mostly read John Cage, and you heard about John Cage. And in fact, there was a time where I thought it wasn't even important to hear his music. You could just read about it, the same thing. Then I went to grad school and played his music and realized it's very different on the inside. It's very different than what he talks about, in a good way. But anyways, he also did some visual work. I think the plexograms or whatever in that room are from the 1970s or late 60s. And then the stuff in the space right over there are from, I think 1988, which was about 3 or 4 or 5 years before he passed away. So both kind of towards the end of his career, that one more so, he was involved with experimental music since I believe the 1930s, and definitely 1940s, and one of the perhaps the most influential experimental music composer of the last century. He's known as the father of indeterminacy and one of the first people to use chance procedures. In terms of what that is, those are two very specific strands of methodology that he used, where he, in terms of chance is basically he was a fan of Zen. And for him, Zen was all about getting rid of his ego, getting his ego out of the compositional process, and disintegrating or evaporating one's likes and dislikes. Okay, so that it wasn't about like, oh, I think that should be a little bit higher and a little bit prettier and that a little bit darker. Like he wanted to get away from those sort of choices, and he gave the choice up to the universe in a sense, to chance. And he used this fantastic document called the I Ching, which is from China. And it's a form of bibliomancy where it's not a book that you read from cover to cover. It's kind of like, like with the tarot deck. Anyone do tarot? And, you can like pull a card and then you go to the book and you read like, oh, this card. It's more kind of like an encyclopedia for certain kinds of things. And you use it by, flipping coins or flipping straws and stuff like that. And you come up with hexagrams. Anyways, he would use that. He would basically create a system where he generated all of the possible things that could happen in a work or certain set of possible things, and then to make the decision as to when something would happen and how loud and for how long and for how silent and etc., he would flip coins to make those decisions. So that was chance. So that's kind of half of his primary contribution to experimental music. The other one was, and so in that case, it was trying to get the composer out of the way. Again, he tried to get the composer out of the way through indeterminacy. And this notion of indeterminacy was the idea that, the composer might write the work, but then when he hands it to the performer then has a chance to choose how to interpret the work, but not in like a way like, just about like interpretation that way. He would put instructions that were potentially very open-ended. Okay, so for instance, this piece is for 1 to 100 players. Okay, you might witness it one time with one person as a solo. You might witness it another time with 100 players. Very different realizations of the exact same piece. He would have, I'm not quoting him on these because I can't remember any specifics, but he would have stuff. Well, he had, for instance, one of the pieces that we're very interested in here is one called Songbooks, and there are 90 solos in it to choose from, and you can perform any one or more of them during it, and any number of people can perform it at the same time, performing their own solos. There are 90 solos in it. And one of the solos, the basic instructions are perform a disciplined action at maximum amplification without feedback. So in this case, maximum amplification without the feedback going between the whatever. So, perform a disciplined action at maximum amplification. I'm sure. No, that was perfect. If we asked everybody in here to interpret that, it would be. I have no idea what anybody would do. Like I didn't expect that. I wouldn't expect what any of you would do. Cage said that the music I'm most interested in is the music I haven't yet heard. He's talking about a sublime kind of music or performance that was something beyond what he could imagine. He was like, I don't want to hear the stuff that I can think about and write down. It wasn't about putting notes on a page that he knew, although he did do some of that for certain things. But so indeterminacy was all about giving this kind of freedom to the performer to make choices, to make decisions. And it was a certain kind of liberty. And it makes sense with his politics. He was an avid anarchist. There's a lecture that I heard him do, or I only heard a little bit of it, this recording, and he was like in 1975, and he was telling the students, don't you dare vote. He's like, I haven't voted, I never will vote. He was like, he was totally like against governance. He was an anarchist. But as we'll see, his notion of freedom and liberty was a very particular one. There are different kinds of freedoms and liberties, and his was a very particular one. So to kind of link this, so there's Cage, who is doing this kind of experimental work, and who's next door, who's adjacent to here. And so how does that link up then with BESHT, the Bureau of Experimental Speech and Holy Theses? Well, John Cage was an incredible public speaker. One of his very first well-known lectures was at the Hollywood Bowl in 1927 when he was the age of 15. He won the Southern California oratorical competition with a speech called Other People Think. In that speech, he's talking about American relations with Latin America, Central America, South America at the time, and he proposes that America shut up and be speechless for one day, that we turn off all of our industry and be quiet so that we can listen and hear what other people think. So at the age of 15, he was describing a certain kind of silence, a certain kind of viewership, that then made him famous, about 20 years later, 20 or 30 years later, with his most famous piece, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which is also known as his silent piece. Right? Do people know 4 minutes and 33 seconds? In 4 minutes and 33 seconds, the original performance of it, now it actually can be for any duration. In the piece, in the original performance, and for any instrument or action or whatever, there was a pianist, and it was broken up into 3 movements that added up to 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And during the movement, the pianist took the lid of the piano and closed it and just sat and looked at the timer. And then when the first movement was over, he lifted the lid again and paused and kind of got ready for movement 2, and then began movement 2. And then finished movement 2, and I'm doing the fast version. I'm doing the 10-second version. So that was a performance of it, because it can be any duration. It was kind of scandalous, but it also changed the face of music. Again, it wasn't about the sound that the performer, in this privileged position on the stage. It was about, it ended up being a lot about the sound of people in the audience, shuffling uncomfortably, leaving, doors closing and opening as people were leaving, people grumbling, sighing, getting angry that they paid for this show, the sounds of traffic outside in New York, etc. It welcomed in this other kind of unintended sound and action and emotional stuff. It was also a form of resistance. Think of this, in a sense, the performer was on stage performing a sit-in. People had come there to hear music, to hear a performer perform. The performer was sitting there, in a sense, not performing, but then they were. So they were performing a certain kind of, especially in that moment, a form of civil disobedience. And so, Cage is very interested in Thoreau, civil disobedience. A lot of his work, in fact, that work, the solo that I told you about, a lot of the other solos during that piece songbooks cite Henry David Thoreau's journals. And so, anyways, so we've got Cage's lecture at age 15. Throughout his career, he was constantly lecturing. Now, actually, one quick thing. He came to Pomona for 2 years and then quit school and went to Europe. But while he was here and going back and forth between here and his folks' place, he was also making money giving lectures. One of his jobs was he would go to women's groups in Santa Monica, apparently, and give lectures on modern art. So he was doing public speaking like as a job. And then in his career, he was constantly going, touring, playing his music and talking about it. And I haven't pinpointed when it happened, but at a certain point, he must have realized that his lectures were just another performance vehicle that could be subverted or used, or basically a lecture could be composed the same way he was composing his works, his musical pieces. And so he started, taking his lectures. He would take different lectures and cut them up, make collages with them, right? And he would choose when to do different parts by flipping coins beforehand, you know, to arrange it. So it was very much like a, you know, a William Burroughs cut-up sort of thing, or, you know, a Dada. At his point, you know, he was probably very influenced by Dada and their cut-ups. And then he would also do things like, you know, he would take the lines and, you know, he would notate like how, you know, he would just have lines across the thing, and some would be stretched out, and so some lines would be spoken really slowly, and other ones you'd have to read really fast so that you could get the whole story in within a minute. And he would also, you know, indicate, you know, when he should take his glasses on and off, or drink, or yawn, or whatever. Anyways, he composed his lectures, and then, so it's very unclear when he would go to do his lectures, whether he was performing or lecturing or both, whether you were witnessing a John Cage composition or not. I mean, you were, basically. But anyways, so now flash forward to me, you know, kind of growing up and not hearing any John Cage, but, you know, knowing that I was kind of interested in, starting to get interested in experimental music and Zen and stuff like that. And all I had were his texts, which were mostly just lectures. And then I'm looking at these, and they have like timings, and they don't make sense, half of them. Or only if you read, like, if you can find the ones in the same typeface, you can kind of follow one of the lectures. And, you know, all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow. Oh, I didn't realize that you could do that with a lecture, that you could do a lecture and maybe it doesn't have to even make sense, or maybe it doesn't even have to be audible, right? Or maybe it's, you know, whatever. And then once you have that kind of knowledge that there are other ways to do a lecture, then when you go to lectures, you're like, why is this experimental artist doing this lecture in such a traditional, boring way, like I'm doing today, you know? But I'm more in motivational speaker mode today. This is my character. So anyways, yeah, thank you so much. So it's that, so Cage, with this, he was not necessarily a guru, but he was someone who brought people into a certain kind of mindset. He didn't tell people what to do, he showed them what was possible, or showed them that more was possible. And you see that in the work of Fluxus, you know, the people who studied with him in the 50s who then developed Fluxus. Many of them were, you know, primarily painters or composers, and they switched sides or blended sides as soon as they met him. They branched into performance and sort of expanded, you know, all of those things became an expanded field because people realized, you know, we don't have to follow all of these rules, or that we can follow other rules. We can create more rules and less rules, etc. Anyways, it's fascinating. So anyways, he was a great speaker. But then things kind of shifted slightly in 1975. And so the last kind of thing related to Cage that we're particularly interested in here at BESHT is 1975. There was basically a week-long John Cage festival at State University of New York, Buffalo. And it was called June in Buffalo, June 4th, 1975. And this group called the SEM Ensemble, which was pretty well known for doing controversial versions of all sorts of works, performed John Cage's songbooks, the collection of 90 solos. One of the performers was the queer African-American composer named Julius Eastman. Julius Eastman performed his solo in the middle of the set. It was about an hour. He came in and did about a 15-minute performance. And his interpretation of the instructions, perform a disciplined action at maximum amplification, was to deliver a lecture. The lecture he delivered was a proposal for a new system of love called the sideway and sensitive system of love. It was proposed as a replacement for the in and out system of love. And he brought up his two specimens, a man who was supposedly his boyfriend and a woman who was supposedly his sister. And the man he undressed completely on stage and caressed, and the woman he undressed from the waist up. There's a recording of it that I just uncovered recently, and you can, and as you listen to it, the audience, which is it sounds mostly like young college boys, are giggling like crazy throughout the entire thing, which is I mean, there's a lot of laughter involved with John Cage's music in general. Things are kind of odd and absurd, but this was like a very different kind of laughter, like this very, very nervous laughter. And part of the nervousness was because John Cage was in the audience that day. And from I've spoke to some people who witnessed the concert, and apparently as soon as the entire thing finished, John Cage stood bolt upright, disowned, like to the people around him was like, that was complete bullshit. I'm not quoting him there, but he was basically like, that was not, he went on stage, accosted the performers, told them that they had done it completely wrong. And then the next day, he gave an artist lecture for over, I think, an hour and maybe 10 minutes or hour and 15 minutes, where he basically used the entire time to mostly excoriate the performers for their interpretation of his work. He went so far as to state that he regretted having ever composed the piece. Why are we at BESHT fascinated with this moment in experimental music history? It's just another performance, and it's not pretty common for composers to be disappointed with their performers' interpretations. And he had suffered many moments of disappointment with performers, of just not like, well, one, just not reading the instructions, right? He gave them, oftentimes very open framework to interpret his work, but oftentimes they just wouldn't even read it. So, but in this case, I think it's a little bit problematic. What it demonstrates is more a paradigm shift, a shift in thinking about interpretation, as opposed to, I actually think personally that Julius Eastman actually did interpret the score according to the instructions quite well. I don't think it was what Cage expected or even wanted, but I think that's still permissible within the reach of that piece. And in fact, I'm not sure, but Cage had been involved with a publication called Aspen in the late 60s, like 65, 66. You can find it on Ubu Aspen. But in one of those issues of Aspen, there was also a very important text called The Death of the Author by Roland Barthes. And you guys have probably had to read that like 3 times or something by now. And so I think this is kind of like, if you think about it, this is about maybe 9 or 10 years after that was published. And so this is kind of a big, I feel like this is kind of a big moment for Cage to kind of reckon with that, that while even if he's sitting in the audience, that he is no longer perhaps the primary beneficiary of his work, that he's not necessarily the author of it anymore, that it's about this relationship between the performer and the work, and that something else is going on that you might not be able to see the value in, but there might, even though you don't see it, it might still be there, and it might be up to you, the viewer, to find that value or to create that value, etc. Or maybe there's no value there at all, but it's not about judging it, right? So anyways, this is a very interesting moment, really fascinating. The transcript of Julius Eastman's lecture has been transcribed and is located in our first issue of the BESHT Weekly. Yes, thank you. Which is available out there for free. We're going to have 5 issues of this. Also, Cage's very first, his lecture that he delivered when he was 15 is also reprinted in here, care of the John Cage Trust. You can see that. We actually had a 15-year-old actor or orator come in last night, and he re-delivered Cage's lecture. Other people think last night. Well, hopefully the video worked out, and we'll post that for everybody to see. And so anyways, so there's a lot of other, now, and in general, as a final wrap-up, so we're interested in this realm of public speaking and how one might use these forms. Can one perform these forms? One is already performing these forms, even if you don't intend it. You're choosing from a very narrow selection of options. But there's a lot more available to you, and perhaps in this space people can use it the way Toastmasters does, where the stakes are very low, where potentially, where one can try things out and make sense or not make sense or make something else or just breathe for a long time in front of people. Anything is possible, almost anything, within whatever other kind of rules and regulations you guys are dealing with here. It's probably within those boundaries as well. Eternal Telethons. So a couple things to stay tuned for. I'm going to hand it off to the telethon now because I've been blabbering at you for a long time. But one, please check out our publication. It's free and available. There's going to be a series of events that happen mostly on Thursdays during the art after hours. During those, like for instance last night, we did our first one, and usually what happens is at around 8 o'clock we have our primary program, but before and after we have this fabulous series called Diction for Dollars, where anybody, students, staff, community members, gallery visitors, can come and earn $1 a minute by coming up to the lectern and lecturing on whatever you'd like. Last night we gave away about, I think, $154, and we're looking to give away more on the upcoming ones, so please consider coming. We had everything from someone reading from their journal to someone reading a best man's, a groomsman's toast from like 3 years ago that he delivered, to all sorts of weird things. One other thing to note is that the space from 12 to 5, so during gallery hours, regular gallery hours for this space, it's basically just an open mic, and anybody can come and use it who wants to. And so I encourage you to, if you want to, if you have any public speaking needs personally, you can speak to the empty room and talk just to your internet audience if you want. If you have any student groups you're involved with, any affinity groups, any activist groups, any stand-up comedy groups, anything, you're welcome to come and use the space as you see fit, to rehearse or to perform or to whatnot. So I invite you to come and use the space if you want. I also invite you to come and just listen. And in each of the BESHT weeklies I recommend, there's a wonderful article called Scores, Activist Listener Scores, and they're actually they were mostly collected by Ilana Mann, who's a Scripps professor, and there's this pamphlet that she would give out to audience members whenever she'd go give an artist lecture, and there are all of these scores, these performances, text scores that people in the audience can perform while they're listening to a lecture.
She did that when she lectured.
Oh, excellent, yeah. Oh, awesome, so you guys know. So we worked with Ilana to expand, update, and even add some more to them. So there's a whole bunch of those. So you might recognize some of them in our publication each week. So you can also be an activist listener as opposed to an activist speaker. Any quick questions about BESHT before, in terms of just... The next one, okay, yes, so in fact, so usually things are on Thursdays, but next week there is not something on, there is a concert, a John Cage concert on Thursday, but we're not doing anything. Instead, next week what we're doing is we're doing an Eternal Telethon, or the Eternal Telethon is presenting an Eternal Talkathon next Tuesday, Election Day, from 12 to 5, and we're going to have about 10 to 15 artists come in and do all sorts of fun, weird things, much like what you're about to witness, and maybe very different too. And it's extremely serious. It's mostly lectures just like this, not. What? Oh, yeah. Oh, did we confirm that? Can we confirm?
Yes.
Oh, my gosh. Obama is going to come and... Yes. That's my favorite Obama. Okay. Well, it's with great pleasure that I now introduce to you two of many members of the Eternal Telethon, Alexis Disselkoen and Nico Soloria. Will you please give them a hand?